Did you know in 1675, an entire English town burned to the ground? And when forced to choose between saving their own homes or saving their favorite pub, the townspeople chose the pub. The full story is stranger than that single fact, because there's a detail buried in the eyewitness accounts about exactly how they saved it that sounds like something out of a drunken fever dream. And the reason this pub survived when nearly every other building inside the town walls didn't reveals something about 17th century English life that nobody talks about. 350 years ago, this year marks the anniversary of one of the most devastating urban fires in English history. And almost nobody remembers it. The Great Fire of Northampton. Not London. Northampton. The key players. A town of roughly 5,000 souls. A merciless September blaze, and one pub that refused to die. The man who recorded what happened was a local writer whose account survived the centuries. None of that was the real problem. The real problem was what people were willing to lose. The number that stopped me cold is coming up. Let me set the stage properly. September 20th, 1675. Just 9 years after the Great Fire of London had traumatized the entire nation. England already knew what urban fire could do. London's horror was fresh in the collective memory. Timber-framed buildings packed together, thatched roofs, narrow medieval streets acting as wind tunnels for flame. Northampton had all of these ingredients, and on that autumn day, a fire broke out near the castle. The wind was ferocious. Within hours, the blaze consumed roughly 3/4 of every structure inside the town walls. We're talking about 700 houses destroyed. The All Saints' Church, the spiritual heart of the town, gutted. The town's market infrastructure, its civic buildings, homes that families had occupied for generations, ash. According to History Extra from the BBC, contemporary accounts describe nearly every pub inside the walls being destroyed. Nearly every one. Think about what that means for a moment. Not just in terms of property, but in terms of community. In the 17th century, the pub wasn't just where you drank. It was your bank, your post office, your courtroom, your hiring hall. Destroying the pubs meant destroying the social fabric of the entire town. By the way, if this kind of story is the reason you're here, hit like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love the weird corners of history. What I'm about to show you is the part most people are missing, because in the middle of this inferno, with the wind howling and the fire jumping from rooftop to rooftop, one pub remained standing. One. And the story of how it survived is where this goes from tragedy to something almost absurd. Now here's where you need to understand the psychology of a 17th century English townsperson. Your home is burning. Your neighbor's home is burning. The church is on fire. The fire is advancing toward a pub, likely your pub, the place where you've spent more waking hours than your own kitchen. You have a choice. You can form a bucket brigade to try to save your house, which is already half consumed. Or you can do something else entirely. The people of Northampton made their choice. They chose the pub. But they didn't just choose to save it the normal way. They didn't haul water from the nearest well. No. According to the remarkable contemporary account that survived, the locals rolled full barrels of beer out of the cellar, hauled them up onto the roof of the pub, and fought the fire with ale. Let me say that again. They poured beer on the flames, barrel after barrel. They climbed onto a burning rooftop and doused the fire with the very product the building existed to serve. The alcohol content in 17th century English ale was low enough. We're talking about small beer, session strength stuff, mostly water with just enough fermentation to kill the bacteria, that it actually worked as a fire suppressant. It was wet, it was abundant, and they had a lot of it. Stay with me. The last part is what actually matters. Here's what makes this more than just a funny anecdote about drunk Englishmen. The villain in this story isn't the fire. The villain is indifference. Specifically, the indifference of the Crown and the national government to Northampton's suffering. After the Great Fire of London in 1666, Parliament had poured resources into rebuilding the capital. Christopher Wren redesigned the skyline. Insurance frameworks were invented. London got a resurrection. Northampton got a collection brief, essentially a license to beg. King Charles II authorized the town to solicit charitable donations from other parishes across England. That was it. No architect, no National Rebuilding Fund, no Wren. The message was brutally clear. London matters. You don't. The people caught in the middle were ordinary tradespeople, families, publicans, people who had just watched everything they owned turn to cinder. And the heroes? The heroes were the ones on the roof with the barrels, because they understood something that the government apparently didn't. The pub was the one institution that could hold a shattered community together long enough to rebuild. So here's the payoff. Here's the thing that changes the whole frame of this story. The townspeople didn't save the pub because they loved drinking more than they loved their homes. They saved it because in 1675, a pub was the most important civic institution in an English town outside the church, and the church was already gone. All Saints was destroyed. The pub was the last communal space standing. It was where deals would be struck to rebuild, where homeless families could shelter, where news would be shared, labor organized, grief processed. Saving the pub was saving the town. The decision that sounds irrational, choosing beer over shelter, was actually the most strategically rational choice those people could have made. They knew instinctively that a town without homes can rebuild. A town without a gathering place simply scatters and dies. And they were right. Northampton did rebuild, slowly, painfully, with almost no help from the Crown, but it rebuilt. And that pub, the one soaked in ale on a burning September night, stood as proof that sometimes the ridiculous choice and the wise choice are exactly the same thing. Before I go, here is your historical footnote of the day. Speaking of fire and strange choices, in 1212, a massive fire broke out on the south bank of the Thames in London. Crowds rushed onto London Bridge to watch the spectacle. Then a second fire broke out on the north side of the bridge, trapping thousands of spectators between two walls of flame on a narrow medieval bridge with buildings on both sides. Contemporary chronicles suggest as many as 3,000 people died, making it possibly the single deadliest structural fire in English history. The event was so horrific that the city essentially suppressed the memory of it. You will not find it in most history books. The records exist, but they are buried in monastic chronicles that few people ever read. 3,000 souls erased from popular memory because the story was simply too awful to retell. That is your footnote for today. If you ever find yourself choosing between saving something practical and saving the place where your community actually lives, Remember Northampton. Remember the barrels on the roof. Subscribe to Weird History. I cover this every single day. See you tomorrow.